Hi, everyone. I'm glad you're here because today's episode is a doozy. Today, I have 3 stories that nearly shattered everyone involved as they tried to rationalize what happened to them. Just wait until you hear what you're about to hear. So, if you're enjoying the channel, don't be invisible. Let us know you're out there and smash that subscribe button so we can always be together. Thanks. Now, let's get into the stories. I was excited for our camping trip in the mountains of Colorado. We were a group of 5 friends looking forward to the weekend, but one thing I never expected was to come face to face with a creature that seemed to defy explanation. We arrived on a Friday night, and it wasn't long before we started to hear strange noises. At first, we just wrote it off as the wind or some small animals, but as the noises grew louder, we began to feel very uneasy. However, none of us had been there before, and so we just explained it as being normal sounds of the area. Saturday, we were up early and had a busy day of hiking. We got back to the campsite by 6 and then spent the evening around the campfire. A few hours into that night, we heard a loud rustling in the bushes. We all heard it, and we got quiet. Within less than a minute, a large, hairy creature emerged, slowly, from the darkness. We all sat wide-eyed, staring at it as it stared at us with its piercing yellow eyes. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Was this a Sasquatch? The creature was huge, towering over us with its broad shoulders and massive frame. Its long arms hung down to its knees, and its fur was thick and matted. I had heard stories about creatures like this before, but I always thought they were just myths. As the creature started to approach us, we quickly realized that we needed to escape the area now. One of us jumped, which triggered the rest of us, and we all ran through the woods, dodging trees and bushes as we tried to put as much distance between us and the creature as possible. It was just instinct that took over all of us at this point. Part of me couldn't help but wonder if we were hallucinating, though, but the fear in my heart told me otherwise. After what felt like hours of running, we finally reached a clearing where we could catch our breath. We all looked at each other, panting and sweaty, and I could see terror in everyone's eyes. We knew that we had just had a close encounter with something that was beyond our understanding. As we huddled together trying to calm our nerves, we tried to formulate a plan despite our brains being shattered, leaving us shaken and scared. I mean, here we were, a group of friends who had come to the mountains to enjoy some time away from the city. We'd never expected to come across something so strange and terrifying. We all decided that we needed to head back and assess the situation. And even though most of us wanted to leave right then, we decided we would just do that in the morning. As we sat around the campfire again that night, we talked about what we had seen. Some of us were convinced that it was just a bear, while others were sure it was a Sasquatch. We tried to rationalize what we had seen, but we couldn't come up with any explanation that made sense. The next day, we were all feeling better, and there had been no further incidents, so we decided to go on a hike to clear our heads. We wanted to get away from the campsite anyway, to try and forget about that thing for a while. But as we walked through the woods, we couldn't help but feel like we were being watched. Every rustle in the bushes or snap of a twig made us jump. We walked for hours, trying to put as much distance between us and that thing as possible, both figuratively and literally. But as the sun began to set, we realized we were lost. We had aimlessly wandered too far from the campsite and had no idea which direction to go. As we searched for a way back to the campsite, we started to hear strange noises again. It was the same rustling that we had heard the night before, and we knew that it couldn't be a coincidence. Suddenly, we found ourselves at the edge of a cliff. We had no choice but to stop. We turned around, only to see that there it was, the creature, standing right in front of us. We could see every detail of its massive frame, from its broad shoulders to its long arms, its fur so thick that we couldn't see its skin, its eyes glinting in the fading light. We were frozen in fear, unsure of what to do next. But then something very unexpected happened. The thing didn't attack us. Instead, it let out this deep, mournful cry that echoed through the mountains. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it disappeared into the trees. We stood there in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. We had twice come face to face with a creature that most people believe is a myth, and it spared us our lives both times. We didn't know what to make of it. As we made our way back to the campsite, we talked about what we had seen. Some of us were convinced that the Sasquatch was a peaceful creature, while others thought that it was just biding its time before attacking. We all agreed, however, that we had to respect its power and its mystery. When we finally made it back to the campsite, we thankfully found that our supplies had been untouched. It was almost as if the Sasquatch had protected us. At least some of us thought that. We packed up our things and left the mountains, still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. In the end, we never did find a definitive answer about the creature, but we all knew that we had experienced something extraordinary. We would never forget the lesson that we had learned, that there are some mysteries in the world that will never be fully understood. I'm here to share a story with you about a terrible encounter I had with a creature that has left me horrified and shaken. Your channel's been a source of sanity for me in the face of the unexplainable, and I hope that by sharing my story, others can find the same solace in knowing that they're not alone. I was sound asleep in my apartment. I'd been struggling to make ends meet for a while, working long hours to pay my bills and living alone in a cramped space. But despite the hardships, I always felt safe in my home. That all changed that night. I'm just an ordinary guy working a not-so-great job and living paycheck to paycheck. I never believed in the supernatural, paranormal, God, or anything like that. What I saw that night, though, changed everything for me, forever. I was awoken in the middle of the night by a strange noise coming from outside my window. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard scratching and tapping on the glass. I got up to investigate, but as soon as I approached the window, I became paralyzed. There, outside my window, was this creature unlike anything I had ever seen. It was pale-skinned with long limbs and fingers that ended in sharp claws, and its eyes were black pits, and its mouth was twisted in a gruesome snarl. It looked like a cross between a human and a wild animal, and it was staring right at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stood there staring back at the creature, and then without warning, it threw itself through the window, landed on the floor of my bedroom, and then lunged at me. I jumped back and fell to the floor and then watched as it gave me this strange look and then jumped back out the window. I was too stunned to call for help. Too scared to move from that spot. I was alone and vulnerable and didn't know what to do next. The creature was gone, but the damage it had caused was undeniable. I was looking at the window that was shattered and glass everywhere. I was still in shock, trying to process it all, when I heard my window in the kitchen explode open. It was the creature, returning for another attack. The thing was now inside my apartment, and there was no doubt that it was coming for me. I was living a nightmare, and I didn't know how to defend myself, especially from something I didn't even know what it was. I jumped up and slammed my bedroom door closed. The thing then clawed furiously at the door. I could hear its awful, labored breathing on the other side. And then in a moment of desperation, I reached for my phone and dialed 911. I could barely speak. My voice was trembling, and I literally couldn't get the words out. Luckily, the dispatcher could hear the panic in my voice and sent help. As I lay there waiting for the police, eventually the clawing stopped, and I listened intently to try and hear the thing's next move. But instead, I heard it scurry away. When the police arrived, they found me huddled in a corner, shaking and probably sobbing. I've never felt so vulnerable and small in my life. They searched the apartment, but there was no sign of the creature. They took my statement and tried to calm me down, but I could sense that they didn't believe me. They asked me if I had any enemies or people who would wish to harm me, asked if I had any family that I could stay with that night. I told them no to all of these, since I was broke and barely did anything other than work and sit at home. They said it was probably just a burglar, a thief, after something they could sell. But I know the truth. I know what I saw. It wasn't until I was able to do some of my own research that I figured out what I had seen that night. I'm pretty sure it was a creature called the Rake, a paranormal entity that preys on its victims and leaves them traumatized. It's said to be a creature that's been around for centuries, lurking in the shadows and waiting for its next victim. As I learned more about the Rake, I began to realize that my experience wasn't unique at all. Others have encountered the creature, and they were left with similar feelings of terror and helplessness. It was a horrifying realization, but it also helped me to understand that I wasn't alone. Since that night, I've done everything I can to protect myself from the Rake. I've installed extra locks on my windows and doors, and I always keep a weapon within reach. I know that it might not be enough to keep me safe, but it makes me feel better than doing nothing. I still have nightmares about that night, and I know that I'll never fully recover from the trauma of the experience, but I also know that I'm not going to let the Rake control my life. I'll keep fighting and pushing forward and sharing my story with others who might be going through the same thing. I feel we can help each other. Looking back on that night, I feel lucky to be alive. The Rake is a creature that most people never encounter, and from what I understand, those who do rarely survive. But I'm also grateful for the experience in a strange way. It's made me more aware of the dangers that lurk in the shadows, and it's given me a new appreciation for life. At the time this happened, my husband was a trucker and was working long weeks. He had recently been gone 5 days at a time, so on this day, it was just me and our 2 dogs alone at home. We had recently bought a great cabin right on the edge of a national forest in Washington state. I was there and planning to stay for another 2 days. On this particular day, I had taken the dogs for a walk down by the stream in the backyard. It's only a few hundred feet away from the back door, so it's nice to get them out in the summer, especially when it's hot. We live on a pretty quiet road and the dogs are well behaved, so I had them off leash. We walked down the backyard and I sat on a log to watch them play in the water. And then after about 20 minutes, I noticed that they had stopped playing and they were just sitting at the edge of the water, looking upstream. Our nearest neighbor is almost 15 miles away, so I thought that maybe it was a deer or another animal that had caught their attention. A few minutes later, my older dog got up and started sniffing around like he was trying to pick up a scent, a trail of some sort. He kept sniffing around for a while before he took off running up the stream, and then 5 minutes later he came running back towards me, but then stopped about 50 feet away and just sat there looking upstream. My younger dog was still sitting on the log with me, but he started whining. He's always been nervous in general, but this was all very unusual and got my attention. I decided that it was now time for us to head back home since things were feeling weird and neither of them were interested in playing anymore. As we were walking back up the hill to the house, I looked back once and I noticed something moving through the trees on the other side of the stream, maybe a half mile from where we had been sitting. It looked like a very large man or woman wearing camo clothes moving slowly through the trees along the edge of a clearing in the forest. But it didn't really move like a human. It's hard to explain, but the arms and legs looked longer than usual. It didn't seem to notice us, and I kept watching it as best as I could while trying not to make any noise or move too quickly up the trail towards the house. The dogs both had their tails tucked between their legs. This was concerning too. We got up onto the porch and into the house, but behind me the back door slammed. I turned and looked around back where we had walked from, and I could see the thing in the woods stop. It had definitely heard the noise. I then closed the main door and locked it, and then I went to a window quickly to look out. For a few minutes, I couldn't see anything, and I thought that whatever it was had gone further into the woods. By this time, both of my dogs were shaking really badly, and they seemed terrified. It was weird that they weren't calming down, so after a few minutes, I walked around and looked out each window again. This time, the thing was in the yard, and it definitely was not a human. It was somewhat hidden a bit behind 2 pine trees, but close enough that I could see that what I thought was a camo outfit was actually greenish-brown hair. The thing shifted from foot to foot, and I ducked back, afraid that it would see me. My heart was pounding out of my chest, and after what felt like an eternity, it finally turned and walked out into plain view, right across from the back door. The creature stood there and seemed to be sniffing the air around while it was standing there. It was very tall, and it had broad shoulders and long arms. The dark hair covered its body except for its face, which was lighter in color. Its head looked slightly pointed or something, but I couldn't really see the face since it was turned halfway away from me. Eventually, it started walking down through the small field that we had crossed to get to the stream and disappeared off into the trees. I watched until I could no longer see it as it moved further away from our house. The dogs were both crying even though they hadn't seen it. I ran for the phone as fast as I could and called my husband on his cell phone. I told him that something had just been standing back behind the house looking at it and sniffing the air like it was trying to pick up a scent. I described the creature to him. He thought I was joking, but after telling him several times that I wasn't, he finally started to believe me. The dogs crying in the background probably helped. After a few minutes of talking on the phone with him, he said that he'd call me back in 15 minutes when his truck stopped for a break. When he called back, I told him exactly where the creature had walked through the yard and that it was heading north. He told me to take the dogs and get out of there, to head to one of our friends' houses, closer to a bigger town until he got home in a few days. I did that, and when he finally got home, we walked the property with the friend and 2 of his other buddies. The dogs would not leave my side. We didn't find anything except for some snapped branches, but I didn't feel comfortable being alone at that house for long periods of time after that. My husband took a job in town, and now when I take the dogs out, I'm on alert pretty much the whole time. I'm not sure what it was that we saw that day, but it was big enough for me to realize that humans definitely are not the top predator. Hopefully, that thing was just passing through.